on this Saturday night, tanks deep inside the Gaza Strip as Israel's ground war begins. The intensified retaliation and the second phase over that deadly Hamas attack.
To the residents of northern Gaza and Gaza City, your window to act is closing.
The casualties as Israel's defense force steps up its assault. Unbearable anxiety.
I can't wait anymore. I need my son back home.
Families of hundreds of hostages held captive demand answers from Israel's leader. Fears the military onslaught puts loved ones at risk. Plus, condemnation in Canada.
We're really outraged.
We're fed up. We know that we're complicit in this.
The frustration over inaction.
Global National with Farah Nasser.
Good evening. Israel has shifted to the second phase in the war and is pounding Gaza with its full firepower after expanding its ground operation inside the Palestinian territory. Overnight, Israel's defense force intensified its bombing campaign on a scale civilians inside Gaza have never seen before. Tanks also moving deeper inside Gaza, backed up by that constant barrage of airstrikes fired from the ground and from the sea. The war will be long and difficult, stressed Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in a televised news conference tonight, a rare and lengthy broadcast message to the world in which he took questions from journalists for the first time since the outbreak of the conflict. The comments made while mass carnage unravels within Gaza. Just how much, we don't know, because internet and lines of communication are cut off after key infrastructure was wiped out. Aid still very slow to reach those in need. And a warning, some of the details and images in our coverage tonight might be disturbing to some of our viewers. Our Daniele Hamamdjian has our top story from Jerusalem tonight. Danielle, strong words from Netanyahu. What more did he have to say?
Farah, for years, Benjamin Netanyahu positioned himself as Mr. Security. But today, he refused to take any responsibility for the intelligence failures that led to the October 7th attacks. He believes his mission now is to save the country, calling it Israel's second war of independence. He said never again, and never again, he added, begins today.
We can't see the gunfire, but we can hear it. Israel says its troops are still in Gaza after an overnight expansion of its operations, after what the UN says was the most intensive bombardment yet on the enclave. The Israeli Defense Forces claim to have struck 150 targets and to have killed a number of Hamas commanders. Among them, a key figure in the planning of the deadliest attack on Jews since the Holocaust. Today, officials in Tel Aviv once again issued an urgent call for Palestinians to evacuate to the south of Gaza.
Hamas puts your life in danger by placing weapons and forces within civilians' area in Gaza, including schools, mosques, and hospitals.
With the near total blackout, getting any information out of the territory is practically impossible. Recorded on Friday before communication lines went down, these are some of the last images to come out of Shifa Hospital, located in the north and specifically mentioned by Israel. Thousands are seeking refuge here, while the children are just trying to be children. The babies in the neonatal unit are at the mercy of staff who refuse to evacuate. Israel says that beneath them, underground, is a Hamas command center. Global News cannot verify that claim. I am begging you, she says, please stop this bloodshed now. We can't bear it anymore. Enough is enough.
People definitely were taken away by surprise.
We were able to speak briefly with Mansour Shuman of Calgary as he huddled next to local journalists for a signal.
All my feelings are being now suppressed and channeled into action. All I'm focused on is getting the message out to the world in English about what's happening here to the Palestinian people by seeing an escalation in the diseases, given the crowded spaces and the lack of cleaning supplies.
70 kilometers away from Gaza is Tel Aviv, where normal life is interrupted by air raid sirens. Hamas continues to strike. The bombing campaign in Gaza, many say, is absolutely justified.
We must do it because we have no other choice. I mean, if we won't do it, they will destroy us.
And in response to claims made by the Turkish leader that Israel could be guilty of war crimes, Netanyahu defended the IDF, saying it does everything to avoid harming non-combatants. He also pulled his diplomats out of Turkey. Farah.
Daniele Hamamdjian in Jerusalem tonight. Thank you, Danielle. As Israel intensifies its attacks on Gaza, fears are mounting for the hundreds of hostages held captive by Hamas. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today met with representatives of the hostages' families, where he promised to do everything possible to bring them back. Now, that was not before those families rallied in Tel Aviv today, demanding more assurances on the safety of their loved ones as Israel's military operation escalates.
No, I can't wait anymore. I need my son back home, and I need the mission. It was happened in the Prime Minister and also the Defense Minister on their shift. They have to solve it now.
Joining me now is Global News investigative journalist Stewart Bell, who was there in Tel Aviv. He now joins us from Jerusalem. Stewart, what was the mood like from those people today, and what's their position on how they can get their loved ones back?
Well, hundreds of Israelis have been gathering today in Tel Aviv, and they want to make sure that the prisoners held hostage by Hamas since October the 7th aren't forgotten. And the concern, of course, is that the Israeli military has now moved its land operation into Gaza without the prisoner issue being resolved. We still have roughly 230 Israeli and other nationals that are still held captive. And their slogan today was "Everyone for everyone." They're proposing a deal in which Hamas release all of the prisoners, and in exchange, Israel will release all of the Hamas prisoners in its custody.
What is Prime Minister Netanyahu saying about that?
Prime Minister Netanyahu, he said that freeing all of the prisoners was one of the goals of his war. But he said that pressure was the key. He said the more the pressure, the greater the chances. Now, shortly after that, Hamas released its own statement in which it said that it was willing to release the prisoners if all Palestinian prisoners were released by Israel.
Global News investigative journalist Stewart Bell, thanks so much for your coverage. And rallies were held across Canada today, condemning Israeli airstrikes in Gaza. Pro-Palestinian demonstrators are demanding an end to the bombardment, and they accused the U.S. and Canada of looking the other way. As Touria Izri reports, events were held in Canadian cities to bring attention to the 200 Israelis kidnapped by Hamas.
Free, free Palestine!
Pro-Palestinian protesters marched in Winnipeg and across the country, expressing anger at the relentless Israeli airstrikes in Gaza.
Free, free Palestine justice!
And helplessness over what comes next.
We're really outraged, and we're very, very afraid for what's to come, because who knows what Israel will commit in the dark.
The rallies were held after Israel's most intense bombardment yet in the conflict.
We're fed up, and we know that we're complicit in this.
On Friday, the United Nations passed a resolution calling for a ceasefire. Canada was one of 45 nations that abstained because the resolution did not specifically condemn Hamas for its attack on October 7th that Israel says killed 1,400 of its citizens. These demonstrators call Israel's bombardment and blockade collective punishment of 2 million people, half of them under 18.
I find it just unacceptable that the Canadian government does not request the immediate ceasefire.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau supports a humanitarian pause to help get aid into Gaza, but he has stopped short of calling for a ceasefire.
People are angry, people are hurt, people are worried for their loved ones.
That hurt is on display in Canada's Jewish community. In downtown Montreal, people posted flyers of some of the 200 Israelis taken captive by Hamas. This woman lost her cousin in the attack.
I feel sorry for the children in Gaza, but when I hear in Montreal, people justifying the brutality, how can you justify it?
In Ottawa, a vigil was also organized for the hostages.
It's been horrible for the community because everybody either directly knows somebody who was murdered, injured, or taken hostage, or knows somebody who knows somebody.
An attack and response that's left many Canadians deeply shaken. Touria Izri, Global News, Ottawa.
Turning to other news now, there's a sense of relief in the United States, in Maine specifically, where the man suspected of killing 18 people has been found dead after a 3-day manhunt. The news came just hours after police lifted a stay-at-home order for the normally quiet community of Lewiston. Jackson Prosco is there, and he has our coverage tonight.
The search for Robert Card came to an end here, inside a trailer at a recycling facility where he used to work. It's not far from where police found his car after the shooting. Investigators say the suspected gunman died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound.
There was a couple of firearms found at the scene. When he took his own life, I don't know the answer to that.
Over days of intense searching, police came to question whether Card was in fact still alive, based on a note found in his home, leaving behind banking and personal information for loved ones.
You know, if you talk about, is there a motive here, right? I think clearly there's a mental health component to this.
That history of mental health problems did not stop Card from purchasing weapons just days before the massacre. Investigators say all the firearms they've recovered were legally purchased. Families of the victims are still trying to process how this tragedy could have ever happened.
Can't even go bowling. You can't even go have a drink at a bar or enjoy a meal with your family without fear.
Bill Young and his 14-year-old son Aaron were killed in the bowling alley, along with Aaron's youth bowling coach.
Did nobody see him walking towards the building? What was going through my brother and my nephew's minds?
Joseph Walker was killed in the sports bar after he used a butcher knife to confront the gunman.
He could have gone right out the back door. He was only 20 feet from the back door. He wouldn't have been possibly even shot at all. But I knew my son wouldn't do that anyways. I knew that was not going to be Joey Walker.
Adding to the trauma, Lewiston and the surrounding area have been unable to mourn. Instead, residents spent days under lockdown while the suspect was on the loose. Only now can they come to terms with what happened.
When the shelter in place was lifted, we knew that we could come out safely and put this memorial out, get something started to show our support.
This weekend, the first public vigils are expected here in Lewiston and in the nearby town of Lisbon, where the suspect's body was found. While residents say they're relieved the manhunt is over, the death of the suspect means they may never get full answers about what motivated the deadly rampage. Farah?
Jackson Prosco in Lewiston, Maine tonight. Thank you, Jackson. Cross-border support. Coming up, how a Nova Scotia community is showing support for those reeling from the Maine mass killings. The mass shooting in Maine this week struck a nerve in Canada. Nova Scotians know all too well what it's like to experience tragedy, like what happened in Lewiston. Global National's new Atlanta correspondent Heidi Petrocek spoke with those affected by the tragedy on April in 2020 to see what their messages were to those affected.
For Mallory Colpitts, the news south of the border hits hard, even from almost 1,000 kilometers away.
It is important for them to know that I am thinking about them.
In April 2020, Colpitts survived the Nova Scotia mass shooting, hiding in her Portapique home for hours while a gunman murdered 22 people.
The thing about these ordeals is there's really no survival's guide to surviving.
Nova Scotians like her are now all too familiar with the toll such a tragedy can take, even years later.
You know, survivor's guilt is very real. Freeport is right here.
New Yorker turned maritimer Allison Strawn couldn't sleep after hearing the news about Maine, with family living about a half hour from where the shootings happened.
I was watching a fire department Twitter, and I saw that they were actually calling in medevacs and life flight to bring people to the Boston hospital, so you knew it was big at that point.
Her 2 sisters and 3 nieces spent the day sheltering in place as police searched for the suspect. The small towns and back roads of rural Maine, so similar, she says, to those the Nova Scotia killer passed through to evade authorities until he was shot dead by police 13 hours after his massacre began.
I wanted to send a message to all of Maine that, you know, we're all with you, because it's something that you don't easily recover from.
The Provincial Health Authority, realizing the ripple effect here, is reminding Nova Scotians to reach out for mental health support if they need it.
It's hard not to, maybe other people can process it differently, but it's very difficult for me not to pause and feel the pain of that.
Everyone needs support in their own way through that.
Colpitts says providing support is urgent now and down the road, which for those in Maine will be long. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Halifax.
Ahead, imported tensions. Israel's war with Hamas ignites conflict here at home. In Gaza, with more than 200 hostages still unaccounted for and Palestinian losses in the thousands continuing to pile up, many Jewish and Muslim Canadians here are not only grieving, but they're feeling tensions increase. Tonight, Heather Yourex-West looks at the rising reports of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in Canada.
A rabbi's house egged and tagged with swastikas in BC. A Jewish-owned business surrounded by protesters in Toronto. Canada's Jewish community says increasingly it's feeling under attack.
It is obvious that anti-Semitism is still alive and well.
Canada's Palestinian community is feeling uneasy as well. The murder of a Palestinian-American boy in Illinois this month fresh on everyone's mind. The 6-year-old was killed in what police say was a vicious anti-Muslim attack. In Toronto, Palestinian parents say their children are also being targeted.
Since October 10th, our group has been informed of numerous cases of anti-Palestinian racism, discrimination, harassment, and bullying in schools across Toronto.
There is a lot of disinformation that is out there.
Sociologist Jasmine Zine worries that in the wake of the Hamas attack on Israel, Islamophobia is now being stoked in Canada as it was following September 11th.
That constructed, Muslims very broadly as being connected to terrorism and violence.
As an example, Zine points to the rallies in support of the Palestinian people, protests that have been viewed across communities in very different ways.
In Alberta and across the country, of course, it's the vulgar protests in support of Hamas. Of course, it's anti-Semitic because they just couch their words. Free Palestine. Free Palestine from what?
We make it clear at all of our demonstrations that we stand against all forms of racism, including anti-Semitism. And I want to stress that anyone who supports Palestine needs to understand that anti-Semitism is not what this is about.
Communities seemingly at odds within Canada, sharing a sense of fear and profound pain. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
Next, the Palestinian Canadians who say Ottawa needs to step up. As Israel steps up its air and ground attacks in Gaza, the Canadian government says it's working around the clock to secure a window for Canadians to exit the city. Joining me now is Noura, whose mother-in-law, uncle, and other family members are stuck in Gaza. Noura, thanks for joining us. And I know you've asked us not to use your last name out of fear it could jeopardize your family members there. So let me ask you, when was the last time you were in touch with them? And when was the last time they heard from the Canadian government?
The last time I heard from my mother-in-law was at 6 o'clock in the morning yesterday. She texted us. She said she was okay. And then at 10 o'clock in the morning, our time, we heard that the cell towers were bombed and we lost all communication with 2.3 million people in Gaza. And so we were immediately alarmed because we had no idea what was happening. We didn't know anybody that was reporting on what was happening on the ground. The last time, we were also in touch with families, Canadian families, who have told us that the last time the government was in touch with them was 10 days ago. And so they have not provided clear plans. They have not created pathways for them to evacuate. The Canadian government was really quick on helping Canadians in Israel evacuate through chartered planes. Why can't they do the same thing? Why can't they, communicate with their allies in Israel to create pathways through Israel for Canadians to leave through Tel Aviv through chartered planes that will protect them? Unfortunately, they feel like they have no hope in the government and are being treated like second-class citizens.
You know, the conflict and the tension has made its way here, and there's been a lot of misinformation on both sides. So how frustrating has that been for you?
I mean, as a Palestinian, we are against any hate being put on any community, whether it's the Jewish community, the Muslim community, and the Christian community. This is not a religious based issue, and it's really dangerous and really alarming to see the disinformation going around about these protesters. You know, I've heard things that are labeling pro-Palestinian protesters as Hamas supporters, and this is far beyond the truth. This is, something deplorable. Like, we don't stand for anything like this. We have Palestinians that have families that are there, that are standing against the war crimes and the genocide that is happening, in real time. In front of everyone on social media by independent journalists. And so this blackout that has happened creates a greater alarm from us, because it also means that they're being blocked from being able to share what is really happening on the ground. I mean, for Palestinians here, they are fearful to share, to even talk to the news and to share anything because of fear of retribution. And this is not the Canada that we know. This is not the Canada that allows for freedom of speech and, the freedom to be able to protest. And it's really alarming in our community, unfortunately.
Okay, Noura, I hope you are able to somehow get a hold of your family. We're thinking about you. Take good care.
Thanks.
That's Global National for this Saturday, and we're going to leave you with more grim scenes from inside Gaza as the Israeli military ramps up its operation. Good night.